Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 169th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those watching on video, you'll notice that at the bottom of the screen, we have a guest. It's Meena Wood. Hello, Meena.
Hi,
Meena.
hello, good
I
morning,
think this is a
everybody.
return visit for you, isn't it?
It is, yes,
Because where were you last time we spoke?
Turkey. As you do, and that's
Yeah,
where I was. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I
lovely.
think you were out there for a while, weren't you?
Yes, I was during COVID, actually, 1920. What am I talking about? 2020.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was. We were out there for 10 months. We just couldn't get back
couldn't
because
get
the
back.
flights were cancelled and there were huge issues here. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Well, just explain to people who you are and how we know each other.
Sure. Yes, so I was a former HMI colleague of Frank, and we worked together at Ofsted. And before that, I was a teacher in a secondary school. I then moved into further education and became principal of an adult college and worked in 3 large FE colleges. So I'm very familiar with schools and with FE, with further education. And then joined Ofsted in 2002, left Ofsted in 2014, and basically went back into the school sector, and finally became a head teacher or principal of an academy in the north of England. Subsequently, I left and I wrote a book called Secondary Curriculum Transformed, which was really championing the cause of having a curriculum that is actually fit for purpose, that skills up and trains up young people, in a way that actually means that they can follow the professions, the careers, the destinations they want to follow, rather than the current curriculum that we have, which fails 1/3 of our children at 16, and not including those who are excluded from school because they're not deemed academic enough and because of other reasons. So it's a book that really creates a case really for a radical change to our curriculum in this country, and moving towards a curriculum that's far more in line with some more enlightened international models. And the other piece of work I've been doing is on the inspectorate. I'm writing a chapter towards a book now, which is looking at Ofsted, and and my chapter is very much around international inspection, because I've worked, I am a registered inspector for the Emirates for Dubai. So I've seen a lot of very good practice in that country. So I've done a lot of research in other countries, and what heartens me is, there is some excellent practice out there. The issue I have, what disheartens me, is that despite all the talk around change, which we have at the moment with select committees and so on, I'm not sure there are many people listening and looking at what's out there and what we can use in our country. So that's me.
So do you feel? I think we have submitted an oral submission
Yes, we have.
to the Select Committee inquiry. But do you feel sort of fairly negative then that it may, not wishing to go in a tailspin here, but that in effect it probably, there was a lot of emphasis placed on the importance of this, but are you feeling less optimistic that it's going to lead to significant change now?
I think the change that's needed is quite radical. And the issue here is that what's not looked at is the totality of the school improvement systems in this country. So I'm not even talking about Ofsted now, I'm talking about the accountability framework in the UK for schools and for maths. And that's very important, the multi-academy trust. Because what you have is a fragmented landscape in this country. And Ofsted, with all its different iterations of its frameworks, is not able now, and I think the cracks have very much come through and been shown that it can't meet the job of holding schools and maths accountable and allowing for that independent accountability, because it's not triangulated. I mean, I can talk a little bit more about that, because when you see models, one of the things that struck me about the models that are happening in other countries where it really is effective is that you've got a triangulation, a multi-layered accountability framework that incorporates the government, that incorporates, you know, an inspectorate or a reviewing body, whatever they call it, and the school. And at the heart of that is the self-evaluation by the school that drives, you know, the process, which is then triangulated. And the support that comes back into the school comes via the government or the local body, you know, so it's always triangulated, and there's always quality assurance at every level and accountability. So you won't find, you know, an inspectorate or reviewing body now deciding they go in, do their bit, come out, write a report, and then go away. It's actually held accountable because somebody has to pick up those pieces. And so there is a process in place that flows. Sadly, in our country, what we have is an accountability framework that's totally centered genuinely on one person, which is the school head and the governing body. And if that then becomes a pass or fail, a bit like the exam system. And if that doesn't work, you know, if the person is not deemed to have passed the Ofsted, then what happens is the whole thing crumbles. And there's a heavier reliance on external consultants who then come in. And I think that then doesn't work because they're not quality assured. They're not part of the accountability framework. So you've then got, as you were saying, you know, the spin-offs that go on, and no one is holding them accountable. So it is a very fractured and fragmented landscape that we have here. And then, as I said, the other layer is the MAD, and no one is holding them accountable.
No.
So it is very multi-layered, and in other countries they've taken account of that by having more of a centralized system, which works, you know. And if we look at the OECD outcomes for these countries, they're far better than the UK, and the PISA outcomes and so on. Yeah.
Interesting, Stan. I did some work for strategy. It was published this week where I looked at the 13 summary evaluations of maths that have been published over the last year. And really interesting when you look at them, how superficial they are really, because first of all, they don't look at the financial position of the mat, you know, so it actually could be I mean, I know they have the annual audit, but the bar to prove that you are a going concern is very low, you know. So in effect, you've got enough to pay your bills for the next few months, really. But the other thing is that looking more closely at the outcomes of some of the individual academies in those mats, I saw one where there were 4 inadequates out of a mat of I think about 16, where those schools have been in the trust for quite some time. I think in excess of 4 years. But the reading the evaluation report, you know, it sings praises so much, you know, that you think, oh, hang on a minute, you know. Another weakness is that in that evaluation process, they don't visit inadequate schools. So the 4 schools that you would think the MAT was really putting their elbow to improve, you know, they don't go near them on the basis that it's viewed that gets in the way of their improvement. But I would have thought that those are just the schools that you need to go and visit to make sure there is some positive impact. So I think the point here about MAT's evaluations and inspection, you know, what is there isn't really fit for purpose at all. You know, it's not really worth having. But
one
anyway.
of the points I made at the select committee was precisely that. It was around accountability for maths, and actually the MP Robin Walker perked up at that point and said, you know, yes, that would be a role for the DfE to decide how that works, because for me this begs the role of the regional commissioners. You know, surely they should be doing what you're saying, Frank, you know, holding those mats to account, and that isn't happening. And the other thing they should be doing is triangulating the value for money, because if you look at, you know, the funding body that, you know, EFSC, that goes in, does that funding review of schools and maths, but it's not triangulated with the school improvement side of it, the accountability side. So unlike for FE, where when I used to inspect FE, you did have a finance person, auditor, who came in with you and gave you that value for money judgment, if you like, or told you about it, and then you were able to see, does this marry up? If I've got inadequate areas in this college, but actually they've got huge amounts of surplus, and what are they doing about those areas? You know, and it's that kind of professional judgment that you could arrive at as Ofsted HMI, you know, around the FE sector. None of that exists now, so it's all gone, you know. So
Yeah, the marketisation of the sector is a real danger, isn't it? I mean, it's always a danger, but I think, you know, the sort of independence of MATs away from, they're not, you know, actually, are they really being held to account by the regional directors? I'm not sure about that. I really am not sure that is actually working. And if it is working, it's not working very quickly.
No.
But I think I also wrote a paper for Schools Week, an article a few weeks ago, which talked about there needing to be an appointed and elected, in effect, sort of person who was responding to or working with the regional mayors, city mayors, to actually sort of make sure that everybody engaged in whatever form of education and skills in that community actually were all pulling together. Because it's quite easy for an individual trust or whatever to go their own way and to say, well, I'm accountable to my board. You know, these are our children. These attend our school. I know they may live in a particular part of the city, but actually our concern is this. And that therefore means that they don't have to play a coordinated game or role with others in the community to deliver what that community needs, you know?
But you could get around that. Sorry, I just finished that. You could get around that if you had a framework which actually had something in there around, are you responding to local market needs? You know, and again, I'll come back to FE. We used to have that. And that was something we used to have to look for when you went into FE colleges and adult, you know, and training providers. That's not happening. Again, there is no joined up thinking between what's happening with the MATs. You're absolutely right, Frank. You've got MATs being set up for, you know, we want our MAT to be purely around, I don't know, making children happy or mental health. It's fine. I've got no issue around that. But, you know, how is it responding to developing the training and skills needs of the local economy and the wider economy, the global economy? You know, are you fitting children for the world beyond, you know, I don't know. I was going to say Salford, but I won't. Stop.
Well, for us, I mean, I've got a few months left in Blackpool, and actually there is a massive plan to use offshore wind and tide to develop green energy, which could be stored on sites around the town for digital storage facilities. So in effect, it's like the cloud.
Yeah.
Now, that's not an issue that perhaps Salford, you know, Salford haven't got the space to deliver that. Blackpool can.
Yeah.
And what we need is young people with a skill set that can actually, you know, enable them to stay within Blackpool, to enable them to get some of these jobs. But what's going to happen? We have such a digital divide in Blackpool. You know, we have too many kids that haven't got access to a digital device, don't have connection, that actually kids elsewhere are going to rock up into those facilities and take jobs. And we haven't broken the cycle of poverty at all. And there's been no real attempt to do it. You know, anyway. In a tailspin. We mustn't get in the tailspin.
I just think the other thing with your accountability is technically the local authorities have the right to hold MATs to account, but haven't got the people or the teeth to do it.
Yeah. Well, and also I chair an independent board paid for by the council, but actually, if a CEO says to me, "Oh well, whatever," I mean, I have no power.
No,
I've got a bit of influence, got no money. I can speak to the regional director, but if she doesn't want to do something about it, I mean, the way to hurt MATs is through the funding formula, isn't it? That's basically how you get them.
That's why I said in the beginning, you know, the funding has to be linked inextricably. It has a symbiotic relationship with school improvement or MAT improvement or accountability frameworks. Let's put it that way. It is one strand of it. Money speaks, money talks, and that's where it should be, you know. But that's the problem in this country because it's not there. You know, that is a missing link, and that's what happens in other countries where they make it a part of that whole accountability framework, and it's multi-layered. And you know, Stan's point is a really good point. I used to be an LA advisor, senior education advisor, and you know, the issue was always, you know, how far can you actually, I used to work with the schools, but it was always about good practice and doing reviews and so on. But you couldn't do much more than that, really.
No.
You
Yeah.
relied on Ofsted to come in and inspect the schools or
Yeah.
the maths, or well, they didn't inspect the maths, but the schools. So your role was very much a sort of facilitator of some kind, you know, which even that I think has probably gone now. So yeah.
Go on, Stan.
No, that was as you were saying, my role when I was in Wakefield. There was, I mean, fantastic relationships with the heads of the schools.
Yeah, definitely.
And that worked really well. But as for actually holding them to account, there wasn't the tools to do it.
No, exactly. And even
there
though
needs
these
to
were
be
local
some.
authority schools, for me, they were local authority schools.
Yeah.
But you
Well, I
know,
think there needs to be somebody who's that bridging point.
Mm.
You know, and I think that person needs to be appointed, not like no disrespect to regional directors who were sort of in effect DFE appointments, and they've transitioned into this regional director position, but actually they're appointed by, you know, as civil servants. You know, I want to see an appointed person with all the people, you know, all the significant parties in that appointment process, so that there's a level of confidence about and independence of that person, you know. But anyway, let's move on. Stan, what's called? Well, it's this week, isn't it? We're all Ofsted this week, but that's the front page of Schools Week this week, because we've had an NEU report, which Meena was involved in, I think a little bit in advising, an IPPR report about Ofsted, and Ofsted's annual report as well. And Stan, I think you've got something from the annual report.
Yeah, I've skimmed through the annual report. I haven't read it all in detail, but I'm obviously I'm very keen on early years. I'm an early years fan. I've got a lot of nurseries in our organisation supports, and looking through, I was hit by a graph that's on State of the Nation overall effectiveness for state-funded schools by phase at year end. And there's a pattern. All schools, 16% outstanding, 73% good. Primary, 14%, 76. Secondary, 16%, 66. Alternative provision, 18, 68. So it's a pattern. Nursery, 62% outstanding, 35% good. Now, it doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Now, you know, I would have thought there'd have been a statement after that to say, you know, there's clearly an anomaly here, and we're going to look into it. I don't want nurseries bashed. I don't want somebody going in and say you cannot possibly be outstanding. But I do wonder if it's about the credibility, the expertise of inspectors going into nurseries who haven't got the background or haven't got that expertise to actually make sharp judgments. And so it becomes, you know, 60.
How many nurseries were deemed inadequate?
The percentage is 1.
I think there's only about.
How many primary schools were deemed inadequate?
2%.
And secondary?
5%.
There's something with the framework, if I may just say, Stan.
Yeah, please.
I think that's very interesting. The framework is what I said earlier on. I was saying the framework is a secondary accountability framework. It doesn't fit, does it? The primary and the early years sector. Therefore, if you've got inspectors going in, how are they, you know, it's a square peg and round hole situation. Added to which, Stan, I think, you know, as we were saying earlier, I don't think you have enough early years inspectors around who can actually go in and really incisive, insightful. Yep, you know, this is not good enough. I'll just give you one example. I'm not looking personally. I'm helping my daughter look for a nursery for our first granddaughter. And we went into a nursery and, you know, one little thing struck me. I would never put my granddaughter there. Why? Because of the negligence of staff with little babies and with toddlers. You know, this little thing like that, a toddler walking around with a nappy, and I'm not kidding, I know this sounds really graphic, but it's the kind of thing you would pick up on as an early years inspector. which should have been changed. You know, she couldn't even walk. It was so wet or whatever. And when we pointed it out to the head of the nursery who was showing us around, she just sort of smiled and laughed and said, "Oh, yes, yeah, of course." And I thought, that's interesting, because she didn't mobilize any of her staff. She didn't do anything about it. And then there were various other incidents that I saw as we walked around. And I thought, no, there are 3 safeguarding incidents I've seen, you know, potential risks I've seen. There's an issue around how staff are deployed. You know, there were various things I was looking at and thinking about, you know, one little child who was such an intelligent child. You could see he was sitting on his own. Nobody was with him. He was ready to go to school and he was just sitting there on his own working. A member of staff was standing at the side, just looking at her phone. And as we walked into the room, and then of course when she saw us, she put the phone away. Things like that are such telltale signs. And yet, and the number of parents who've told me that all they do in nurseries now is they give you, they make up a learning journal that the child has done this today. I'm not rubbishing nurseries. There are obviously some excellent nurseries there, but they will send those those journals home to the parent at the end of the day with the child. Now, that's the kind of thing that inspectors need to triangulate when they go into nurseries, you know, and they don't with parents.
Clarity, the reports nursery schools.
Yeah, it's the maintained element of that, isn't it? So yeah, but I think the point that there is a
sorry, our tail spun there again.
No, sorry, it's really interesting though, isn't it, that when you think about recruitment and retention in that sector, you know, both in maintained you know, these state nurseries, but also in the private nurseries. It's really interesting that I would have thought there would be, and this is probably true of schools as well, lots of reporting on how difficult it is to find, you know, qualified staff, keeping staff, professional development of staff, all of that. You just simply do not read that. No. It's just, and what's frustrating me is Amanda Spielman coming out with stuff, right, yesterday, that, and I read hundreds of these reports. I don't know where that evidence is. It's not in the reports I'm reading. So I understand that there's probably an evidence base, but if these are really important, I'm staggered that they're not reported on in the reports that are shared with parents.
Well, I think one of the things in the report that did flag up an issue about evidence was a whole thing on RE being taught badly in all, you know, the majority of schools. And I thought, I can't remember any school that I know of having RE as a deep dive.
Well, so, Adrian Gray,
yeah, I know,
did an FOI, didn't he? Good old Adrian. And you know, when you have thought, I mean, it's just staggering, really, when you think what's going on in the world. If ever there was a time for RE to be really prominent in our thinking, you know, and going back to,
why not say, of the schools where we did a deep dive, that raised a concern over the quality of RE in schools.
Of the 200 schools where we did a deep dive in RE, 48% of them we had a concern about. That's good reporting, isn't it? That's clear, precise reporting. But what we ended up with is every RE head now is thinking, every RE head of department is thinking, we're not doing well enough.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't inspected, they're thinking, oh, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. You know.
I felt that there were things in the report like that, like, and in the interview on Woman's Hour where she insisted that the framework was well supported within the sector, and schools were happy with it. And then it was the interviewer who had to say, yeah, but you only had 40-odd% of schools reply to that.
Yeah.
And out of your 40-odd, if you're taking a majority of that, and you've not really got a high percentage of schools in support.
Stan, we were talking before, but you were the only person of the three of us, because I think Meena and I just get quite depressed when we listen to these sorts of radio interviews. But you did listen to Woman's Hour, didn't you, yesterday?
Yeah, I did. Can
you just give us a feel as to how?
I think the headline in Schools Week's got it right. It was you're really not listening to what I'm saying, and I'm listening to you but taking no notice. It was a definite, you know, it's not my fault, somehow it's other people's fault. She said there was wasn't quite dark forces, but there there were people who were raising the anxiety of Ofsted, and when asked, well, is that head teachers? No, I'm not saying it is head teachers. Well, is it teachers? Who is it?
It's a Frankenstein chat. That's what's doing it.
Yeah.
She couldn't say that.
You couldn't answer that, and she just, I don't know. It just came across as somebody who's happy that they've done what they've done and is not prepared to listen to any amount of criticism. And then there was the bit on the Ruth Perry, which was just so insensitive. It defied. I noticed that Edmund has tweeted afterwards to say some things that she said weren't actually true.
Yeah.
Like the fact that she contacted the school 4 times without a reply.
Yeah, just for clarity, Edmund is a governor, or no, a parent at the school who we interviewed. He approached us actually about coming on the chat, and it was really quite interesting, wasn't it? You can pick that up if you just search for it on YouTube. But it really is. When you listen to that chat, it's really quite stark. Also the events and the impact on the school, let alone on the family, the wider impact
was
of it.
Switched, Frank, into this was used as a pivot to undermine Ofsted, as if they're still having a go at us because of this one.
There is an article that I picked up on in The Guardian, I think The Independent as well, which was the headline was the fractured relationship between schools and parents, according to Amanda Spielman.
Yeah.
And I just think to myself, this is now somebody who is grasping at straws and creating a smokescreen for the inadequacies of her institution. Because yes, there are issues around behaviours in school, and schools trying very hard to work with parents on, on behaviours, on good behaviours for children. I mean, a lot of that is down to some of the policies that schools are now following, which are too punitive and involve then children's behaviours getting worse. So that's just something else. But there is something around parents perhaps not respecting education as they used to, or schools and teachers. However, having said all of that, the fact is, the fractured relationship is between Ofsted and the schools, and that is pretty plain. If it wasn't the case, why is there a select committee inquiry? Why is there all this, absolute torrent of media articles of people saying, professionals in the sector either leaving or saying, I don't agree with the way Ofsted's inspected me. There are so many stories around. So how does that work? And why is the HMCI going on Women's Hour and saying, hands up, it's not my fault, and then also putting articles around in the newspapers, shooting down schools and parents, because actually none of it is her fault. Again, it is a complete distraction, a red herring, and I just think it has to stop. And again, I would question, where is the accountability of the HMCI? Shouldn't she be now I'm going to say this, Frank and Stan, because I feel strongly that this wouldn't happen in a lot of other countries, where somebody who is a senior civil servant is allowed to make statements like that, which actually upset a lot of people. Upset not just parents, upset schools, upset head teachers, it upset maths, whosoever, and former HMIs and current HMIs. And I think that she should not be allowed to be so careless with the statements she makes. She's a civil servant at the end of the day. And other civil servants are shot down when they make statements which are irresponsible. And I just feel there needs to be some more responsible reporting on the behalf of an institution. I'm just putting it there because I just think
I agree with you entirely. There is,
integrity, isn't it? Integrity, moral integrity, which I just can't see happening at all. It's very sad. It's not a good role model for leaders in the education sector, or particularly children, because they're looking at these. Young people are looking at it and thinking, what's going on with our education system? So I rest my case, but I do feel strongly that there needs to be some codes of conduct here, you know.
Now, the other thing I thought, I mean, one of the things she was talking about was a defence of the one word overall judgment, which again, she said she wasn't in her gift to change because the government departments rely on it so much that you'd have to change 100 and something different.
No.
But in the report, there's a conflating of good and outstanding consistently through the report and in the verbal reports. So we clearly don't need the differentiation between good and outstanding. So that's one gone. We're almost then at pass and fail, or as I would prefer to do, meets expectations or doesn't.
Yeah.
And as we've used that for children's reports, I don't see why we can't have an expectation on schools based on their achievement against national or against similar schools, and say, yeah, well, this school meets that expectation. So we don't need to go any further than that. We don't need to say it surpasses it by more than the next school. We just need to say, does it meet the expectation? Is it working at a standard that the government are happy with? Yes. Right. And then you can do the scorecard bit to say, these are the areas of particular strength in the school. These are areas that the school are working on to get better. You know, and if you read some reports at the moment, Frank.
No, go on.
That first paragraph on most reports reads like that. You cannot read that first paragraph and guess what the overall judgment.
I agree fully with you. I mean, so many of those reports say it's a happy school, children love coming here, relationship with parents are brilliant, and then you find it's RI.
Yeah.
And
because somebody didn't know that the Vikings did the...
Yeah.
But the thing, also just picking up on, because I think we're going to run out of time here now, but Meena, the point is also, I think, just to support the point you're making here, that the new chief inspector has come in and said, we need to do some listening here.
Yeah.
Now, if everything was fine, that chief inspector, like all the others, because no one else has come in and said, in my time, no one has said, do you know what, I think we're going to have to do some listening. You know, they've come in, they've all had their own agenda, but actually this listening thing is a telling statement about and undermines what Spielman said yesterday for me.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely
that gives you
right.
hope, doesn't it, Frank? When somebody's saying that, it gives you hope that you know, we are talking about change. There's a lot of pressure for change, and if somebody's saying, well, we're going to listen, and also I still hang on to the bit that he said in his interview about context of schools is important. And I think if we're listening and we're thinking about context, then maybe we've got a change that can recognise that schools shouldn't all be judged on exactly the same.
Not wanting to spin this down, because this is probably going to be the last minute of the recording. He's never inspected.
No.
I'm just putting it out there, you know. It's a bit, you know, I'm just thinking Guardiola probably wouldn't have become the manager of Manchester City if he hadn't been a footballer.
Frank, you're never too old to learn. He can go off on an inspection and be shadowing somebody and start inspecting. I think that would be brilliant. I was a head teacher. You know, I taught as a head teacher.
That's a good point.
Don't see, and you know, but then I obviously started off my profession as a teacher. But he could easily go off and learn the ropes, couldn't he?
And you could argue that he's not got a prejudice.
He's not tarnished.
Yeah, it's not tarnished by inspection.
The existing process.
Exactly.
He can't, because he's not done it himself.
So just to say that this is a conversation and Frank eats humble pie now, because my colleagues on the call have undermined my position skillfully and without hurting me professionally.
I just think it's hope. That's all. I may be proved wrong, but I hope there's a change.
That's a good word to end with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Meena, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back, probably if we're still running in 2025, but lovely to see you. And for everybody, we'll be back next week. And we've got a few more before Christmas. So, and then rocked up all until June of 2024 with guests. So looking forward to all of that. So take care, have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much. Bye.